A few days before I did this video, I mentioned on my community post that if you had any questions for me, go ahead and ask them on the community post, and I would try to answer them in this video. So I'll just go through a few of those questions, and actually I'll go through all of them because there weren't that many. Let's see. Winter sewing. I had several questions about winter sewing. Yes, I'm going to do another video on winter sewing. I'll probably do it in January and March. I will go through the whole thing again on how I make my mini nursery beds, what seeds I'm going to be planting. I've been asked what are my favorite seed companies, and I've mentioned before many times I love Everwild Farms. I like Eden Brothers, and those are basically my two seed companies, my two go-to seed companies. And then I'll buy things from the farm store or Walmart, wherever I can. I've also bought seeds on Etsy and eBay. And for the most part, I've had fairly good success with most of the seeds. So I will be doing those videos again. Okay, my dog is making really weird noises over there, so if you hear anything strange, that is Liam. And I don't know what he's doing. He's doing something very odd. Questions on peonies and dahlias. What advice could I give? I'm not an expert on peonies and dahlias. I've only grown dahlias for about 3 years now, but one thing I learned for sure this year. I like to start my dahlia tubers in pots. I like to let them grow until they're looking pretty healthy before I put them in the ground. And a lesson that I really learned this year is when you put in those tubers, put in some supports, because I had so many dahlia plants that I didn't put supports in, and they were just laying on the ground, and that is not the way I wanted them to be growing. So my best advice is start the tubers out in pots, and when they're just a beautiful size that you really like, put them in your garden and then put the supports around them at that time. Now, I do not dig up my tubers in the winter. I know a lot of people do because you may be in really cold areas. We're in zone 7, and yes, it gets cold here, but it doesn't kill my dahlias. And here's why. After they have flowered and the season is over and they turn brown, I go in there and I cut it all the way down to the ground. Then I take a lot of mulch, about 6 to 12 inches of mulch, and I pile it right on top of that dahlia that I can see coming out of that little bit coming right out of the ground. I just completely cover it up and I mark that dahlia. That has kept my dahlias safe throughout the winter. But like I said, I've only grown them for about 3 years, and this has worked out for me. During that period of time, they've all come back. I know that in some places you've got to dig them up because it's just too cold for them to withstand it. But here in Zone 7, where we do get freezing cold weather and we get snow, I have not had any trouble with the dahlias. One of you mentioned that you do not know how to use a sewing machine and you don't know much about sewing, but you really would like to learn. Well, I suggest that you get yourself a sewing machine. Just get yourself a used one if you have to, and take a stitching class. It's so easy to learn how to use a sewing machine. And once you know how, you can sew pillows and curtains and clothing, and you really will never regret having learned how to stitch. It's something women did in the past. It's just something you had to learn, and I don't know why young women aren't being taught to stitch anymore, except maybe by their grandmothers and their mothers, but I certainly think they should be teaching it in school. And if not, look, YouTube is certainly got all kinds of classes, or maybe you have a friend that can teach you how to use a sewing machine. I think you should give it a try because you will never regret having learned to do stitching on a sewing machine or stitching by hand. You can get all sorts of books on embroidery stitches, needlework, and just about anything. Sometimes taking a class is really the best thing to do, and just firsthand and watching someone actually do it as you're in the room with them so that you can ask questions. Will I do any more tutorials? I've been asked. Will I do any teaching tutorials? And I've done corn husk tutorials, how to make a corn husk doll, What else have I done? I needle felted a little acorn. I needle felted a little acorn because needle felting just is not something that you can learn in a 30-minute video, and so I pretty much avoided that. But drawing, no, I would not do a drawing tutorial. I really wouldn't know how to do a drawing tutorial. But I would love to do a little paper cutting tutorial so you could learn how to do paper cutting, which is a wonderful old German art form. And it's got a great history, and I think the old arts should be kept alive, such as the paper cutting. Can you get my books on Amazon? Yes, you can get my used books on Amazon, but it's better for you to go to my website at jerrylanders.com, Jerry with J-E-R-I, and buy directly off my website, and then I will get a signed book to you, signed specifically to you, with a message written by me to you. And let's see, is there anything you haven't tried before but would love to do? Wow. Well, I certainly would like to learn how to use my loom, and I'd really like to learn how to grow good pumpkins. And I'd love to learn how to be a better spinner. Other than that, the only things I haven't done that I really would like to do is to travel to England and see things, some of the beautiful old architecture and the buildings, and I just love the history of England because that's where a lot of my ancestors are from. But I just think that that's something I wish that I had done in my younger days, and I didn't. So traveling a little bit more than I have would be nice, although I have been all over the US of A, Mexico, and a little bit in South America and Canada. What's something about you that we don't know? Well, here's something about me that you don't know, maybe. I'm a huge World War II buff. I mean, it really doesn't seem like I'm that kind of a person, does it? But I'm telling you, I love World War II documentaries. I love studying about the war. I love the characters, Patton and Neville Chamberlain and Churchill. I mean, these are just things that I love to learn about. I love to study it. And history is just one of my big things, and I think you already know that I love history, but I love medieval history as well. Seriously love medieval history. I probably know as much about the history in England as I do the history in America, simply because it's one of my passions. So basically I'm pretty much a history buff, but not just far away history, but history within back in the 1940s, and also World War I. I'm very interested in World War I. And now, if any of you remember the duck that we took in, the duck with the wacky wing, and we actually had a contest for naming him, and we ended up naming him Captain Alfalfa. And people have asked me, well, how's Alfalfa doing? Well, I'm sorry to say, Alfalfa decided to run away from home. And he stayed here for a while, and he was really very happy, and he'd made a few friends. And then one day we had this really horrid rainstorm. It just was pouring down barrelfuls of rain. And I went outside and I watched him, and he was by the side of the creek. And I went inside for a few minutes, came outside. I couldn't find him anywhere. He had just disappeared. And then when the rain stopped, we walked up and down the creek and all the way across the other property, and we could not find Alfalfa. We don't know what happened to him. I like to think that he swam all the way down that creek, which had turned into pretty much of a raging river. I like to think that he decided to swim all the way down to where it turns into a lake, and that he's living happily ever after somewhere else. So that was kind of heartbreaking when Alfalfa just sort of disappeared into the rainstorm. So I honestly don't know, but he did have a very happy life during the period of time that he was here. I'm going to continue answering questions as I dust off these little antique sewing machines. They're actually children's sewing machines, and most of them are pretty rusty, I think. They could be repaired, but they're not for use. But they certainly are dusty. Let's see. Do you quilt? Do you know how to repair antique quilts? Do you spin or weave or crochet? And are you interested in having sheep, alpaca, or goats? Well, I know how to quilt, let me put it that way. I took a quilting class many, many years ago. I guess when my children were babies, I took a quilting class. I did a few quilts. Back then, quilts were basically done completely machine piecework or hand piecework and hand quilted. I noticed that a lot of people use a quilting machine nowadays, and that isn't the way I learned how to quilt. But I did do a nice tiny stitch. I was pretty proud of that. But other things took over, and I just haven't picked up a quilting needle in many, many years. As far as repairing antique quilts, I have quite a few that would need repair myself, but the threads are so delicate that I really would hesitate to tell anyone else how to do it. However, there are YouTube videos on restoring and conserving old fabrics. They're worth looking into. As far as spinning and weaving, etc., and crochet and knitting, I don't know how to knit. I never did learn. I learned how to crochet when I was about 15, but I haven't picked it up in many, many years. I have a loom, a beautiful little Leclerc loom, but I don't know how to use it. And I have 3 or 4 spinning wheels. Can't even remember how many I've got, but they're very old spinning wheels. One of them is 200 years old, and they're really not the kind of wheels that I would want to learn how to spin on. So until I have time to actually take a proper lesson, I guess that's just one of those things I'll have to wait on. Have you ever had sheep, goats, and llamas? I never wanted llamas. I've had many, many goats, and I actually had 4 sheep at one time. I don't have them anymore because they died of old age. They were all quite 10, 12 years old, and one by one they passed on. And I haven't replaced them. So, no, just my donkeys right now. Doesn't this look like Little Orphan Annie? I think that's Little Orphan Annie right there. Do I play an instrument? No, not very well, not at all. I sort of like play the flute. I sort of play a lap harp, but I would never want anyone to hear me because I'm so poor at it. It's kind of like the loom, the spinning wheels, and the weaving. I just haven't had the time to put into it in my life. And I really admire people that are musical. I absolutely admire people that can play the piano, the guitar. I'm simply not, that's just not something that I ever seem to be able to pick up on easily, although I actually really have tried. But those of you that are musicians, I really, really admire your talent. I'm the kid that wanted music lessons, but my mother couldn't afford for me to have piano lessons, but that's something I think I would have loved as a kid. I've been asked if I'm from Tennessee. I'm not from Tennessee. I've lived here, though, for about 23 years. Or is it even longer than that? I think about, no, I've lived here for 33 years. And I grew up in the state of Colorado, and I was born in upstate New York. But I really love Tennessee. It's beautiful and lush and green, and the temperatures are pretty mellow. But we still get snow. I think if we didn't get snow, I would be a little sad about that, because one thing I grew up with was lots and lots of snow. And as a child, I just loved that. Of course, I didn't drive as a child. That's a whole other story. Someone asked if I had any blueberries last year. You know that I was having trouble with my blueberry bushes. And I think now we have about, 9 blueberry bushes. But I planted them at the end of the season, those last 4. And no, I just got a handful of blueberries. So next year is going to be the big year for blueberries. Do I sell my sewing stuff? No, I just collect it. And my collections have been going on ever since I was really young. So if I seem like I have a lot of collections, that's the reason. I've just collected all my life. And that's really because my mother also loved antiques and was way ahead of her time as far as that style of decorating and being a big collector. She used to do, which they moved into a little cookie cutter house in the suburbs, and the first thing they did was tear out some walls, put in beams in the ceiling, brick fireplace, wood burning stove, and they just really transformed this little cookie cutter ranch style house into a really charming little cottage. And that's the house I grew up in. Questions about my life as an artist. Did I do art as a child? Yes, I did art as a child, and one thing I loved to draw was horses. I used to draw horses all the time, and then I would take the horse pictures to school, and the kids would accuse me of having traced them. So they must have been pretty good, because other kids thought that I traced it, but it used to be very frustrating to me. Now, also, when we didn't have the art supplies we wanted, such as clay for sculpting, we would just go out in the yard and dig up some mud. And I remember sculpting little turtles and little creatures out of the mud. There was a Colorado mud. Drawing lessons. Would I ever give drawing lessons? You know, I wouldn't know the first thing about giving or teaching somebody how to draw. Teaching someone how to draw is very foreign to me, because to me it's something that's sort of natural, and it's not something you can necessarily teach. Although I know people give drawing classes, I don't think I would be able to do it. It wouldn't be the same as teaching, for example, a skill such as pottery, or teaching someone how to do embroidery, something like that. That, I think, could be taught by myself. I just haven't had time to do anything like that. I've been felting. I've been asked this. I've been felting for about 5 or 6 years now. I started because I was signing books at an art show, at a fiber festival, and the lady that was next to me, I think I mentioned this before, she had a booth full of the needles and the felting needles and the carded wool and all that. At the time, I had my own sheep, and I would shear my sheep and give the wool away to other people for their projects. I didn't use it myself. And I just asked the lady if she'd give me a quick lesson. She gave me a quick felting lesson, and the rest is just history, because now I love to felt. And I think it just adds another dimension to my art, which basically revolves around animals and nature. Who taught me to make doll clothes? Well, nobody. I learned how to sew. As I mentioned before, I learned how to stitch in home economics class. And then my mother had a featherweight singer, a wonderful featherweight singer, and I used to stitch most of my school clothes on that. And simply by shrinking patterns down myself for all these little creatures that I make, by shrinking the pattern down, because I know all about patterns and how they're used, I'm able to create patterns for my little characters. And so that's how I make doll clothes. No one taught me how to do it. I just did it on my own. I guess you could say that in many, many ways I'm just a self-taught artist. Trial and error have been my teachers. Take a little minute here to show you my favorite little sewing machine here. And that's this one. I bet you can understand why. Look at the beautiful little decals on here. A little bird, a little songbird, and some cherries. And these are on both sides. And this is a really small and delicate children's sewing machine. And it actually isn't too bad in the rust department, because it actually does have some nice movement here. I think if I got some oil and gave all of these a nice drench in oil, it could probably improve their performance, and I might even be able to stitch something on these one day. I think that might be kind of fun to give that a try. Will we do more history videos? Absolutely, absolutely. I love history videos, and so of course we will. Some more Christmas videos coming up, some more cooking videos coming up, and I'm just, time got away from me and I didn't realize, my goodness, it's practically Thanksgiving and I didn't do a thing about a Thanksgiving video. Sorry about that. You know, for years I've been making this Martha Stewart pastry-covered turkey that I have made for like the last 30 years. And I keep saying every year, I'm going to film that because it's traditional for me to make it. And then I always forget. Every year I forget to film it. So, I don't know. Maybe I'll get around to it this time, but it's getting awfully close. So, okay, that was kind of fun. You know, I didn't get the one question that I thought for sure I would get. So I'll wait till another time and see if anybody ever asks that question. But in the meantime, thanks for joining me here in the stitching area, which has been a lot of fun. Because, don't you just love all these beautiful, beautiful old things? Oh, and I didn't even show you all these great needle packages. From advertising packages, some from the 1920s. Look at the clothing here. Look at her outfit. Imported needle case. Yeah, these are just really, really fun to collect these, and easy to find if you're out looking for antiques. Oh, that's another question somebody asked me. Would I take you on an antiquing trip? And I certainly will as soon as I go to a decent antique mall or town. We have a beautiful town out here off Clinton Highway with just one beautiful shop after another, but I haven't been out there in a couple of years. Basically, you know, I've been collecting antiques most of my adult life, and I don't really buy a lot anymore because I've already got enough. That's the way I look at it. But every once in a while I run across something on eBay that I really like. But I'd love to take you on a trip to a really nice antique store and just talk about the antiques that are there, because I think I'm pretty knowledgeable about antiques simply having collected for so long. In fact, I went through the other day an antique shop just for one specific thing, and I said to my husband, I've got a really trained eye because I can whip through these places really quickly and know if there's anything in that booth that I would even want to have. So yes, we will absolutely do that. Now, I hope I didn't miss any of these questions, but if I did, I'll answer them at some other time, or I'll answer them on the community post. So thank you very much for joining me today. Hope you have a great Thanksgiving. And from Hopalong Hollow, this is Jerry. See you next time. Bye.